Like they just kind of just brushed past that. I was like, what? That's like one of the biggest kind of stories from the whole year.
Its focus was meant to be uncomplicating a very complicated mix of players and everyone's individual experiences.
And what bigger story could you have than that to inspire people to get involved in tennis?
It felt like someone who is a bit lost themselves was the one writing the script.
I feel like that would have been nice to segue from Onjabur into the storyline of Rebecca and then kind of build it into this big three kind of narrative.
It almost made me feel guilty, not because I've ever done anything like that, and I never would, but almost that I'm part of a culture and a base of fans, that there are people among us that do that. That has made a massive difference to the outcome of a match.
Should the crowd at tennis matches be more like, I don't know, basketball? Or should they just be like super, super quiet during the points? Maybe we just do a trial tournament where everyone just has as many drinks as they like, just like shouting for as long as possible. Just make it as loud as you can possibly make it and see what happens. Welcome back to the Getting a Grip podcast. This week it's Breakpoint chat. Was it actually any good is the question. Or was it just a repeat of the first part? What are your overall thoughts having seen it, that documentary that came out recently?
I mean, 5 new episodes. We were a little bit psyched about it because we thought the first season was pretty good, right? But I don't know. Do you want me to come out and say my an instant opinion straight away? Okay, yeah, I thought it was a bit rubbish.
So did I.
And I'll tell you for why. Yeah, I'll tell you for why. I think the main problem was there wasn't really anything new. So there were some new players, great. Some of the new stars, we start seeing a little bit of them. Iga Swiatek, Carlos Alcaraz, a tiny little cameo as well. That's great. But it felt like a recap of the tournaments towards the end of last year. And it felt a lot like they were telling the same stories. You had that one story with the underdog who's always trying to make it, overcome her mental blocks, Ida Tomljanovic. Love that story. But everything else just felt like the same. And not having, say, that story it doesn't really lend itself to anything exciting to get the viewers hooked on maybe what's to come next. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was hoping, I was like, it's the second half of the season. Surely, like, Alcaraz is going to come into this a little bit more. Like, if we're trying to attract new fans or get people engaged in the sport, he is like number one on the list, right? Who else is kind of new, fresh, could be taking over from the big three that are starting to split apart? 'Cause obviously they didn't want to. That there's a clear emphasis on moving away from the big three in this.
Big four.
Oh, the comments are going to give you hell for that. Stick with it, it's fine. But yeah, we're trying to move away from
that's my personality.
Yeah, the stubbornness. We're trying to move away from the big 3 or 4, and we're trying to introduce new players that people are going to be able to get behind for like a long period of time, I feel like. And for me, he is an obvious candidate for that, because clearly it's obviously hard at the start of the year when they're starting filming to know exactly who is going to do well. That's one of the problems. So how much access you're trying to get with each player probably varies in terms of like how you see them, I don't know, being exposed in the actual documentary. But I don't know, I just thought the second half of the year, there was like a perfect chance to kind of introduce him. I mean, they did introduce him, but only briefly. They didn't even show him winning the US Open. Like, they just kind of just brushed past that. I was like, what? That's like one of the biggest kind of stories from the whole year, I feel like. So that disappointed me. Other than that, like, yeah, I don't know. They're trying to get in a lot of different players. I think it's always hard when you're trying to shed a light on lots of different players, and it kind of, for me, just dilutes the overall kind of picture a little bit. It's a hard thing with tennis because there are so many different players and that people follow. It's different, like we said, from team sports where there's a smaller selection. You can kind of focus in on maybe a couple of them. So yeah, that was a little bit disappointing, but I don't know. I think we should just get into the first major, I don't know, storyline of the second part was this whole, leading up to this Kyrgios versus Stefanos kind of match. Obviously, we talked about this last year when it happened. It was a bit of a crazy match, but they're kind of contrasting characters, if you like. Kyrgios is almost like anti-establishment. He goes against kind of the rules and kind of regulations of tennis, trying to fight against that, whereas Stefanos is very much trying to be like the traditional player, abide by all the rules, be professional, all that sort of stuff. So there's this contrast there that builds up, and then it obviously leads into this match where it goes kind of normal-ish for maybe the first, 30 minutes, and then all hell breaks loose on a line call, and then Kyrgios goes back into kind of his antics of questioning line judges, umpires, slowly starts to get under the skin of Tsitsipas. You can kind of see he's always trying to just keep everything just kind of beneath the surface, right? You can see there's something going on there. Like there's almost like a ticking time bomb there. And then it leads into the kind of the end. Stefanos wins the first set, I think. And then there's this incident in the second set where, Kyrgios is just going on to the line umpire constantly and to the line judges. And then basically, I think he ends up winning that second set, and then Stefanos just like loses it, smashes a ball into the crowd, and then they're trying to get him defaulted for the match. So yeah, there's this big contrast between the two characters. I don't know, what did you make of that kind of storyline, and did it endear you more to Stefanos? This is your least favorite player probably, or one of your least favorite players.
Look, I never want to say that I dislike someone, because especially someone I don't know, right? Because I've never met Stefanos. I'm sure in reality he is a lovely guy, but how he presented himself in that situation did him no favors. And funnily enough, actually, because Kyrgios is known to be this character, the way Breakpoint portrayed it, because of the things that Kyrgios has had to endure, the things that he's struggled with, if anything, it only endears him more to me. It only makes me feel more for his side of the story, which doesn't do any favors for Tsitsipas's side of the story, which is quite funny. And for me, I think the largest problem was that for Tsitsipas, he's sort of talking over his own actions and saying, okay, yeah, I suppose that wasn't the right thing to do, but it was him that was doing all the wrong things. It was him that was doing all the wrong things, which I disagree with, obviously quite a lot. I think what was nice about the storyline was it highlighted something that is a problem in tennis, and that is that decisions made on day one in a tournament at one part of the world might be different to a decision made on day 8 of a tournament in another part of the world. For example, Kyrgios, when he has hit a ball in anger that has nearly hit someone in the audience, has been defaulted from a match before. Whereas Tsitsipas didn't get defaulted for that action, and he should have. But if you're going to apply the rule as the same to everyone. So this is my problem. Like, it kind of highlighted that issue in tennis, is the fact that a lot of umpires, and we've spoken about this before, the issue with the culture around umpires in tennis, especially globally. But it highlighted that issue really well, the fact that there's no consistency in decision making.
Yeah, I think, again, it's largely unpaid, right? So we always come back to this point where it's not kind of professionalized, if you like. So you've got this professional sport, professional players, professional tournament, but unprofessional kind of regulators, I guess, if you like, during the actual match. I think, this leads to issues like we saw it in that match where, I mean, regardless, like, if it had actually hit someone, that ball, they would have defaulted him. But the fact that it didn't meant that they were inclined not to, which is kind of silly, because it's, regardless of the outcome, it's the actual action itself, right, that should be dealt with. Yeah. So, and they're also maybe thinking this is actually this is a big match. There's probably a large audience watching. And it might come into their thinking, you don't really want to end this now while like the crowd's really into it and loads of people are watching this. So I don't know if that filters into it. It's tough, but again, you have to go by the kind of rule book that you're given. Otherwise, like, what are we doing here? People are just acting off how they feel in the moment. which doesn't help because then you get this argument and one side versus the other, and there's no consistency.
That's exactly the problem. We need the consistency. You need the rule book being played out the same way every time. Even if you think it's the wrong decision in the moment, you have to stick to the rule. And on that day, it may have been the right decision in the moment, but they didn't stick to the rule, which often causes more issues, right? We've seen the same in football, for example. Upholding a rule, people are like, no, that's stupid. That shouldn't be the rule, but it's the rule. They uphold it. Everyone knows where they stand. So everyone knows what they have to do. When you have this uncertainty and lack of consistency, it's going to unhinge people. It's going to make someone like Kyrgios very, very upset because, if you're experiencing the harsh side of the rule and you see someone being nice to another player about it, it's not going to make you feel very good because there's a lot on the line and there's a lot of pressure in your head. So I think that storyline in the series was nice because it showed a lot. It told us a lot about, just behind the scenes of it. But ultimately, I don't really feel like there were any storylines beyond that really told anything. As you say, they didn't even sort of tell the storyline of Alcaraz winning the US Open. He wins his first Grand Slam. He's 19 years old. It's just ridiculous. And also, you notice in the series, he speaks Spanish for the, say, 5 minutes that he's in it. Or even less than that.
He can definitely speak English.
He can definitely speak English now. So it makes you wonder if, was it that time? Or maybe, why was he speaking Spanish then? There could be all sorts of rules at play that even they're not allowed to tell us. So it's kind of broken its sense of, as a series, it's broken this sense of uncovering the secrets and the truths of tennis, because I feel like it's almost making its own ones at the same time. And for a fact, it's lost its focus because its focus was meant to be uncomplicating a very complicated mix of players and everyone's individual experiences. Whereas Breakpoint has lost its focus by actually confusing us more because there's all these different players and they're not even showing us probably the most important ones.
Yeah, I think what would have been nice is to have, obviously Rafa's still around and he'll still be playing and maybe next year will be his last year, but I would have liked, if possible, to show like almost some parallels between him in his early years and Alcaraz just starting out now, and like a bit of a similarities and kind of almost handing over the baton, if you like. I feel like that could have been quite a nice little thread because we've seen it loads, right? Last year when he was winning his first Masters and this and that, and it was always like, oh, Nadal at the same age did the same thing, and that would have been quite nice. But yeah, you don't know what goes on behind the scenes as whether there might be reasons why they haven't shown certain things, or so we're always left kind of in the dark with this. But you did say at the US Open, there was actually one interesting story that they did bring up, which was the Frances Tiafoe story, which I did like, which is, this is always something that is, goes against tennis, I suppose, in terms of how, like the cost of getting into the sport, and that it's often seen as kind of a sport for the privileged, a sport for, traditional white people essentially. And then you've got this guy that grew up in Sierra Leone, and then his parents moved to America. His dad works as a janitor and his mum's working 2 or 3 jobs, and he basically gets a chance to play at this club, after hours or whatever. And then his dad's
because his dad is the groundskeeper.
Yeah, because his dad's the janitor or the groundskeeper, and he's able to play and improve over time. I think his dad is like a huge influence on him and kind of pushing him and his brother to be the best that they can be. And then it leads us through to the present day where he's playing at the US Open, ends up beating Rafa in the 4th round. I think that storyline, like, we really need to kind of hold on to those kind of storylines, because you want to be inspiring people to get involved, right? And I don't think what more bigger story could you have than that to inspire people to get involved in tennis.
But Francis Tiafoe himself says that, that match was so much bigger than just him and his chances, his career in tennis. It's about inspiring younger kids, especially black kids that he mentions. So I think that's great. He's clearly got a really kind soul and a really nice head on about how he approaches tennis, how he approaches the tour. And you see his coach, he's even talking about the fact that he's almost too nice. He wants to be friends with everyone, so therefore he may be less serious and professional sometimes. Not in a bad way, in a sort of, oh, I'm quite relaxed about this. Well, it will happen. What will happen will happen. Blah blah blah. But I think that's quite nice, because I think that's a really refreshing take, and it's a very nice way for a player to be, especially to win fans. Like, he certainly won me over the way he was portrayed in Breakpoint. For further support in tournaments and stuff like that. No, I mean, I already was, because I adored the way he played tennis. But yeah, when you see someone's personality like that, it certainly does help win some fans. Like, it would have been the same for you with Federer. It was the same for me with Murray, with sort of dry, deadpan humor. It's that sort of Scottish thing. Like these things win hearts, right? And that's always really nice.
Yeah, that's kind of the point, right? We're trying to show the backstories of certain players to get people behind them, to get, pick a player to get behind. You're going to say something?
Interesting, yeah. What was it? We had we've had an interview with Diego Miano. That's already come out, and he used to coach Francis Tiafoe, right? So it does make you wonder sometimes. Yeah, okay, so he's gone through some coaches. The coach he's with now, is the reason that coach is stuck because he brings out that slightly more serious side? Okay, well, that's great. And it does highlight as well, I think, in a nice way, how much more a coach does than just how you play tennis. And interestingly, this episode hasn't come out yet, but it will be out shortly for anyone who's interested. And this is really nice because it ties in so well. Is we spoke to someone from ProDirect who's done some filming with Francis Tiafoe. And out of all the tennis players, he says that he was one of the most truly engaged and nice blokes to work with, because he wasn't just there to do the shoot, and then flit off. He would hang around for like half an hour after he needed to be there. He's chatting to everyone, asking what they do, what they like to do, how they like tennis, all that sort of stuff. And again, it just builds that picture. We're now seeing, at least I'm seeing, all this evidence that he's just a great guy.
Yeah, and it's got to come from the way he was parented, right? And obviously the humble beginnings that he started from. So yeah, I think that was one of the best storylines I think that came out from it. Like, I did know about it sort of vaguely, but that was nice to really like shed some light on that. If we move over to the women's side, obviously Ons Jabeur was kind of quite a big kind of storyline through the whole thing. Maybe it would have been nice to kind of move on to a different storyline, but it did kind of lead her through to get into the final of Wimbledon. They did then bring in Iga Swiatek. Obviously, we were waiting to kind of see her because she's clearly like the main person on the women's side to have involved in the documentary. Like this, we've been looking for, like we've talked about many times, for someone to really take the lead in the women's game and kind of hold on to it, and I don't know, inspire the other players to try and catch up with her rather than it being kind of quite inconsistent. So I would have liked to still have seen a bit more on her side as well, because I feel like even then it was still only a fairly short segment of the whole thing. And they bring in Sabalenka as well. So I was thinking, well, one of the biggest kind of storylines now in the women's game is this potential big three, right? And you've got Rybakina wins Wimbledon, beats Ons Jabeur in the final. I feel like that would have been nice to segue from Ons Jabeur into the storyline of Rybakina and then kind of build it into this big three kind of narrative. I feel like that would have been a nice thing to
whereas
have.
Instead it felt like a recap of their tournaments with a little bit of their personalities mixed in as well. I saw the Swiatek thing, being nervous about playing with Matthew Perry in the audience, and I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, that was good.
Friends. I can relate. I would be nervous too if he were watching. And I thought what they did with Sabalenka was really good, because it highlights the pressures, especially on Russian and Belarusian players, that they've had to undergo the last couple of years because of the political climate, and it is you look at all these policies and you don't really get a feel for how it affects, because Wimbledon bring out a policy where they, you can't join the tournament now because we've banned Russian and Belarusian players, right? Okay. And then us as the fans, we're thinking, oh, so that just means that they won't show up. But for them, it's almost segregation in a way. It is discrimination, and they can't do anything about it because they have no power over their country's politics as individuals, as athletes. So it does help you see. This series definitely helps you see that it can be quite unfair. Those policies can be really unfair to people who work really hard and have nothing to do with the political chaos that's going on.
Yeah, this is something we talked about last year, right at the time, that the Wimbledon taking the points away and then banning Russian, Belarusian players. This year they haven't, but I think for a long time we thought that they might ban them again, which again I think it's pressure. It's governments getting involved in sport again, like we've talked about before, which is unfortunately seems kind of inevitable these days. But it's showing you the kind of real effect that it has on the ground, right? And we've even this year we've still seen more of that. I remember when after she beat a player from the Ukraine, and she was like waiting at the net for her, and then people started booing or whatever. Like you then kind of tying the country that they play for with actually like what they believe in, when actually they're not allowed to necessarily say certain things for risk of, they've got families back home, friends back home, whatever. Like there's other people that are affected by this. They actually say that in the series. They actually say that in the series where we can't say anything about it. So, you almost know what their opinion is based on the way they say that, but you can't know. Yeah, I guess it's this whole silence is compliance sort of thing, isn't it? Like if someone doesn't say anything, you're led to believe that they kind of agree with what their government's doing, when in reality it's not.
I don't think that. The way that they said it in the series makes you think the exact opposite. I would like to say something, but I know I shall not. Because it's only going to be bad for me. So, yeah, of course. I just feel so much empathy for that situation, because it certainly does highlight how, in my opinion, how much sport and politics actually is intertwined, but it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think it also generally highlighted for me the kind of the scrutiny and the impact of even just like social media and stuff on players. I think that was something that they did kind of thread in a little bit, especially with like the Nick Kyrgios kind of storyline and the pressure that's on him and all that sort of stuff. I feel like something they probably could have even built on a bit more is the impact that kind of all this social media attention has. Obviously you don't have to like look at your phone and all this stuff, but like all the players are kind of on them anyway these days, and it's almost impossible to avoid seeing something that's written about you or being talked about. So I don't know, what did you feel about that kind of that storyline? Is that something they could have maybe shone more of a light on? Because they did obviously talk about the mental health of Kyrgios. It was quite an extreme kind of case for him.
I think that would be something that would have been a good thread to have throughout the series as a focus, the pressure on the players and the role that fans play, not just in the stadiums, but outside of it as well. It's unacceptable to send any sort of threatening message or whatever to anyone, regardless of whether you think they've done wrong or whether you think you're so righteous. It doesn't matter. Things like that, as Sabalenka showed in the documentary, it can ruin not just your day, it could ruin your life, because those people are put under an immense amount of pressure because they're effectively getting bombarded with hate, which is, that made me feel... I tell you what, that almost made me feel guilty, not because I've ever done anything like that, and I never would, but almost that I'm part of a culture and a base of fans that there are people among us that do that. That did make me a little bit upset, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I think back to Wimbledon when there was a woman that kind of called out during one of Kyrgios's matches, I think, and she'd had 7 drinks or something, and then there was this whole palaver.
You mean like 500?
Yeah. 7 rounded up to 500.
Yeah.
And then there was this whole like palaver afterwards of like him saying she should get kicked out of it or whatever. And I don't know, I just feel like that's a storyline they could have run with a little bit more, in that almost like fans are getting away with more and more these days and treating players like almost like pieces of meat. I mean, it's kind of, I suppose it's a little bit ironic that we're kind of just talking about players now, but like obviously we're trying to be respectful. But like, I don't know, you just get a lot of people in these stadiums that just saying like horrible stuff and trying to put off maybe the player that they're supporting against. And they're just, I feel like that's something that they could have shone a bit more of a light on, and the fact that these are, ultimately just people trying to play this sport, and they're not just robots.
Well, no, that was the same with the match, because obviously they keep coming back to Taylor Fritz. Very interesting. Shock horror. I didn't know he had a kid as well. That did surprise me, and it felt like a weird segue that they didn't really explore. Not that they needed to. I was just like, oh, okay, fine. But coming back to the point I was going to make, they showed obviously Taylor Fritz and Novak Djokovic playing each other at the the end of the year ATP Tour Finals, and someone shouted out in the audience right at a crucial point where Taylor was couple points away from taking a set or whatever like that. And then it went back, and then he lost it subsequently to be defeated. And you're like, okay, yeah, that has made a massive difference to the outcome of a match, all because some idiot decides to moo like a cow or some random rubbish like, also Novak's the greatest or some rubbish like that. Like, do we need a rule change for that? Maybe you need to replay the point. But then again, that's unfair to the players. No matter what you do, it's unfair to the players. So fans definitely need to be more respectful. Which audience is always known as the worst? The French Open audience. People need to take that on board, almost like feedback to the community. Please don't be an asshole when you're watching tennis.
Well, it's hard when you've had a few drinks, I suppose. If you're with
or
friends,
500,
yeah. When you've had 500, people like egging you on, or I don't know. There's this whole debate still, isn't there? Where should the crowd at tennis matches be more like, I don't know, basketball, or should they just be like super super quiet during the points, and then just the odd little mutter here and there? Like, I think Wimbledon is generally a little bit quieter, although even last year I felt it was a bit different to normal. Like, it was definitely a bit rowdier than I've seen it before. So I think there's this debate almost still going on. I think Francis Tiafoe talked about this maybe a few months back, and how he would like the crowds to be louder actually, and be a bit more like they are at basketball matches. What do you feel about this? Should they be quiet and just allow the players to get on with it, or should we be trying to make more of a spectacle of it?
In a point, you should be quiet. But then again, okay, here's the argument. If you're quiet in a point as a whole, and one person makes a noise, it stands out and it makes a difference. If there is a constant buzz of noise, then maybe you get used to it. So there is an argument here to say, okay, if there's a constant buzz of noise, maybe it's fine in that regard. But also we've got to remember, tennis can be a much longer sport. If you go to a Grand Slam and you're shouting for 3 hours while someone's playing a 5-setter, like I've not got the energy for that. I don't know anyone that does. So I find it unique that people shout out in the audience when it's so quiet. But I do find it also a little bit odd that it can be so quiet sometimes, because I think between points it should get as loud as it possibly can, and I think that's nice, and players like that. But yeah, during the points, again, the way tennis is, it's exceptionally mental. You probably need the quiet.
Maybe we just do a trial tournament where everyone just has as many drinks as they like, just like shouting for as long as possible. Just make it as loud as you can possibly make it, and see what happens. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
I like that idea.
Yeah. It's interesting you say. On the other hand, I remember back to, I don't know, let's just take the time when Murray won Wimbledon for the first time. I don't know whether this was just a conscious thing or just a natural thing because there was so much drama, but I remember on the key points, especially like the match point, everything just went completely silent. And that almost added to the spectacle. So not necessarily making loads of noise actually makes it a better event to watch. Sometimes the contrast of having everything completely quiet during the point almost adds to the interest. I don't know, maybe it's something we should just trial out like just a super like loud tournament with not many rules.
At the same time, we should maybe trial out a tournament without any booze.
I don't think that's going to be possible.
People said that about the World Cup in Qatar, and it was fine. People enjoyed it, so I think it's more than possible.
There we go. Let us know your thoughts on that. Could be a new way forward. No booze, like a boo jar, like a swear jar for booze. You know, penalize everyone for saying the word boo or something that sounds like it.
Yeah.
Are there any other storylines that stuck out for you, or that you felt like they missed, or have we pretty much covered it all?
No, I think that's everything. I think maybe we round up for everyone, see what they see what our overall reviews and opinions are.
What do we give it out of 10 as an overall?
What do
series?
I give it out of 10?
Parts 1 and 2 together.
As an overall series, 1 and 2 together. Okay. Oh, 7 springs to mind.
Oh, it's always like middle of the road. So actually, that's kind of good for based on what we said. It's probably higher than what people would have thought.
Again, I think the first season or the first part set the bar at a really good level. Maybe an 8. But like I say, it just felt more of the same. There wasn't anything new, desperately new, apart from a couple of new characters, which was good. Yeah,
I'd probably give it like a 6 or something overall. I just felt like there was just a lack of focus. I know there's loads of players, but I don't know, it just kind of diluted the overall kind of appeal of it. The fact that they were just dipping into so many different people.
I'll tell you what, it felt like someone who is your average Joe fan who's not intricately aware of everyone on the tour and all their abilities and stuff like that. It felt like someone who is a bit lost themselves was the one writing the script. That's what I think.
There we go. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below on YouTube. We'd be interested to hear what people say. Like maybe you're someone who is kind of just around the edges of tennis and you don't really watch like loads of tennis. I'd be interested to know people's thoughts from that perspective. And yeah, obviously if you enjoyed it, give us a follow on the different podcast platforms. Like it, share it around, and subscribe on YouTube. And we do have an interesting interview coming up this week, as we've alluded to, with someone from ProDirect telling stories of behind the scenes with different players. So look out for that one soon. And we'll see you in the next one.
I think we should be the new Breakpoint.
It's us. That's it. They need us.